Hi, my name is Liza Meynig, and I am passionate about seeing women break free from traditionalism and religion without leaving God behind. I grew up in a church that modeled legalism and hypocrisy. I ended up in an abusive relationship that caused me to question everything I thought I believed in. I was a part of a college ministry that was a borderline cult, and I've worked as a missionary for several ministries where I experienced terrible leadership and a poor representation of Christ. Because of this, I tried to leave it all behind, and I clung to feminism and men. But none of that seemed right either. What I have discovered in this incredibly difficult journey is God's true character and people who are living the lives in Christ I didn't believe existed. It is true. You don't have to be held back by religion. You don't have to hide who you really are because of legalism. But you also don't have to swing to the opposite extreme and leave your relationship with God behind. In this podcast, you will be given spiritual and practical tools to overcome religion, all while strengthening your relationship with God. It's time to become the woman you were meant to be. It's time to become a warrior.
Welcome back to the Warriors podcast. I'm so excited about this episode. I feel like I say that on every episode, but I genuinely am excited because today I have a good friend of mine. She has been with me through some of the hardest, darkest times in my life. And I've been there through hers. We met, 12 years ago? I was 18 when I met you. So Angela, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I love that you're here because we were just talking about this before we started recording. We're both eights and we've both been through so much together. So I feel like this conversation we're about to have today about walking away from religion and how to maintain a relationship with the Lord and how to deal with people is going to be really, really good. So hello, welcome.
Hello. Yeah, I'm an 8, but I'm a wing 9. And I feel like, because I have lived my life in so much like craziness and sometimes conflict, that my wing 9 is like a shining star right now in my life. And I'm like, no conflict, but yeah, no, I am excited to be here. Hey, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, we have been together, 12 years through marriages, now a divorce, new relationships,
engagements, leaving terrible leadership in churches. I mean, you're one of the few people in my life that know what I've been through. And now a lot of the people that I have and the best friends that I have here in the Dallas, Texas area, when I tell them stories about who I used to be and what I used to be like, they just don't have a radar for that. And so many people are like, oh my gosh, I could never imagine that or picture that. And I'm like, but there are people who know. And you're one of them.
Have you ever told your story to somebody and thought, wow, this sounds really like abusive. And it sounds like I was really caught up in something extremely, and like in your mind, when you were in the middle of it, it didn't seem that bad. But as you're retelling it years later, you're like, they're going to think like something's wrong with me, like that I need to go to some serious counseling, which of course we all do because of what I have come out from.
No, yeah, literally. And like you and I were even kind of having that conversation the other day where I felt like a lot of the stuff we went through separately and then together was you just kind of go numb and you get into survival mode and then you tell about it years later and you have like no emotions and you're just like, well, yeah, this happened. And people are like crying or they're just like, oh my God, that's terrible. And you're like, is it? I didn't realize.
Well, and I think I'm your only friend that you were literally told, do not be friends with her. If you want to be a part of this ministry, do not be friends with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which looking back, I'm like, what the hell?
Like, that's terrible. So just to give people background about you, because I've shared little bits and pieces of my story in every episode, and I try to always share something, but can you share your side of the story? We were involved in the same college ministry.
And
yeah, so a little background. Yeah, little background on me. So I grew up actually in an extremely religious. My parents are part of like the Church of God, Assembly of God. If you don't understand that, that's a very, very strict, staunch type of evangelical church that I grew up in. And of course, we had dress codes and things we were allowed to wear and not allowed to wear in church. And actually, were given dress codes when we joined our church by the youth pastor. I was told what I could wear and not wear, and all of that. And that was my norm. I think about 13 years old, I decided that it wasn't against God's best for me to wear pants and makeup. And so I donned my first pair of pants and started putting on makeup. Of course, I looked like Madonna with my makeup. I was not very good at it in the beginning, but yeah. And then I think a little important part of my background was that I really struggled from a very young age to connect with the family unit that I was born into. And so that really kind of set me up for this deficit of feeling the need to belong to some sort of tribe, unit, group of people. And I think because I'm a social 8 and a social 9, that the need to belong is already strong in me. And so already growing up in something where I didn't quite feel like I fit in, it really magnified that need to where it became kind of a life quest, to where I was going to do everything I could to belong so that I was not alone. And that was my number one need to be fulfilled. And I was going to do everything I could to fulfill it. So, unfortunately, growing up in a religious community, a Christian community, an evangelical Christian community, you would think that belonging would like be something that would be really present, but definitely struggled with that. So I left home at a really early age and just kind of stayed with friends and navigated life on my own. And then at 18, I went to Bible school and I met someone there, and he introduced me to a college ministry in my hometown. And it was that I became part of that college ministry. And so we it was a very high evangelical college ministry, and very focused on basically evangelism and missions. And so we did a lot of mission trips and a lot of evangelical things, basically to quote unquote, like spread the gospel and make sure that people weren't going to go to hell when they died.
Yeah. So when I met you, you had already been a part of that college ministry for a while. And I was coming in hot as a super messed up 18-year-old who was in an abusive relationship. And you and I are, what is it, 8 years apart in age? We have 8 years different? I think so. Somewhere around
there. Let's just tell everybody how old I am, Liza.
but I say that because when I came in, you were a bit older. So you were in leadership. And you and I did.
Yeah, I lived in that town. So even after I graduated college, I remained a part of that ministry. Yeah. Basically to help and be a part. Yeah.
So you and I had a little bit of a rough start because I was really messed up. And I think it was hard to, but then we
had a rough start because I was really messed up.
Yeah, like we both were not okay in life. And so we kind of butted heads at first, but then we really bonded. And when we bonded, we got in trouble because you were leadership and I was younger. I was a freshman. I was messed up. And so we were both told that you were to disciple me. And we had this weird, like tension of you were trying to be obedient to the pastor and, disciple and mentor me, but yet we were friends. And so there was just a weird boundary that kept getting crossed with us for a while. And when we started to really get close, it caused quite a bit of waves.
Well, and we call it a weird boundary, but we were just being normal, I think, people and girls. And we met each other and had a connection. And I was kind of so so that was the first community I actually felt like I belonged in.
Yeah.
And so I was going to hold on for dear life. I was going to live and die in that tiny little town. I was going to give my life to the cause of what that ministry represented.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to, basically I was the spokesperson. So I'm an 8, so I have no problem speaking up about what we believe. And so I became the ministry, quote unquote, spokesperson, and really like, I could use my powers of persuasion that be to get people to see things in the same religious view that I was taught. And so, I definitely, the people in that ministry maximized on that talent. And, that's where I drive my belonging was they accept me because I have earned my place because I am the best at proclaiming their message.
Yeah.
And so I definitely, I wore that like a badge of honor. It didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter how I had to do it. I was going to convince you, or if you were unconvincible, then we could very much write you off as damaged goods and, maybe beyond repair, this and that. And so, but we met and I always had this thing in me that was kind of I'm not going to say a rebel. So I've lived a very I never took part of the party scene. I never really stepped out of the rules. And yet something in me always wanted to push against the rules. And, I think there was a good friend of mine. She was a part of that ministry too. We got our noses pierced together. Yeah, we did. We got our noses pierced together. I was like 25, 26, and she was like 21 or 20. And,
and I know who this is. She's on the show, but I won't say who it is.
Yeah. We did. She kept her nose ring. Actually, mine was ripped out by one of the pastors. I was told that, hey, if you have a nose ring, you cannot represent us or God or anything like that. So you need to take it out. And so my need to belong trumped my need to have a super cool nose ring. So I took mine out. However, my friend, she was much more healthier than I. So she stuck with her beliefs. I since then have re-pierced my nose as an adult because I still thought it was cute and I still liked it. And so I done that, but
what are some of the religious, what's some of the doctrine that was preached to you in the whole ministry?
I think the biggest, I'm very conceptual in my thinking. And so for me, it's easier to see the bigger picture, but I think the biggest message that was sent to me in that evangelical community was to question what I was being told. I was fed what their interpretation of the Bible on certain subjects. I was fed that, and to question what I was being told would mean I was questioning God himself.
Yep.
And if I doubted some of that theology, if I doubted some of that ideology, if I had a different way that I felt like God was speaking through those scriptures or through those things, that was very much zoned in upon. I was, quote unquote, corrected to see the right point of view, and to ask questions, to challenge, to wonder meant that I would no longer belong to that community, that I would be seen as, someone who had hurt, or someone who had, who was broken. And the currency of that community was belonging.
Yep.
So the more you preached their message, the more you believed what they believed, the more you belonged and were rewarded with connection, love, and friendship.
Right.
The more you had a different point of view, or maybe you didn't follow the rules that were set up in that community, then your connection and your belonging to that community was 100% threatened, to the point of even being punished. I mean, I have been in several meetings where I was told, because you acted this way or did this, you're no longer allowed to be a part of things until you get your act together.
Yep.
And it was never quite clear what I had done wrong, just that I had disappointed the powers that be, which means I had disappointed God himself.
Yep.
And that I needed to get my stuff, quote unquote, together so that I could join back into community and commune with everybody there.
Yeah.
And seen as significant or seen as important. And so those were some of the biggest concepts that were put in my brain that I ate them alive. I lived by them. I breathed by them. I punished myself so many times in my own head by not being able to follow the rules as I was told. And then, of course, being punished with being banished or, not, put on the bench and not being able to play the game anymore.
Yeah. And we all, everybody who is in that ministry all had to deal with that to a certain degree, but you're right. It was the more you climbed the ladder, the more responsible you were and accountable you were to all these things. And it was a weird, I always joke about how I've been through thousands of deliverances because, I'm coming in an abused girl getting out of a relationship or trying to get out of a relationship that was really dysfunctional. And at that point, I mentally and emotionally was so far removed from the trauma that was happening to me there. I was acting out in other really bad, unhealthy ways. But when I finally started coming out and saying, hey, I think this happened to me. Hey, this is a problem. I was even pulled into secret meetings. That was a big thing. Was you would get phone calls or text messages, hey, come hang out with me. And then you'd show up and there'd be a panel of people ready to discuss all the things that you had said and done wrong. And you and I were used against each other quite a bit in those. There would be times where you'd text me and be like, come hang out with me. And I'd show up and it would be you and our college pastor and somebody else. And I would need deliverance or vice versa. And Can
I just say, anyone who is a part of that ministry who's listening, I just want to openly apologize for drinking that Kool-Aid, for just being a part of ways that people were exposed and humiliated for their humanity.
Yeah.
Or exposed and humiliated for where they thought differently or where they believed differently. And for basically making them more of a project to be fixed, a problem to be solved, than treating them like a human who had real thoughts, real emotions, real experiences with God, and that, that they could live their life no matter how messy it looked, and God might still love them at the end of the day and might even ask me to love them too, versus trying to fix them. So any of you out there that I ever did that to, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
No, I love that you said that.
I was in a meeting with, I'm really sorry.
Yes. And I, same thing for me, because I know for me, the way that things went was, I came in and was so broken, and then I was a project, and everybody was just kind of pouncing on weak, broken Liza, and we've got to get her, from point A to point B in our own way. And if I wasn't in line, I was punished or needed deliverance or excommunicated or whatever, because that was how things went. And so I learned, kind of same as you, like I really have that rebellious streak where I will buck you and really like put my feet in the ground and not move. So I knew what was happening was wrong, but I didn't know the healthy way to fix it. So I just started being really rebellious. But then finally I realized, okay, if I want to be Angela's friend, I have to get in line because she's up here at the top. And if I want to be so-and-so's friend, I have to do X, Y, Z. So then you start doing the very thing to people who are quote unquote underneath you so that you can survive. And so it really did become this ladder of everybody's turning against everybody. Everybody is throwing people under a bus.
Well, everybody is an investigator And
Yeah.
if they investigate, they're like a hound dog. And if they sniff out something that does not follow the rules of that community, they are rewarded by bringing that back as a dog would, like its kill, hunting, bringing it to the hunter and saying, let's shoot this together. And then please pat me on the head and tell me I'm a good dog because I sniffed out something that was potentially could wreck this community or send us all to hell. And, when you say deliverance, basically, which is the concept of like casting out spirits, that was definitely used as an idea of if you question the powers that be, if you question the rhetoric or the doctrine, if you act in any way that is human, that, and when I say that, I mean, like, if you act in any way that community be considered unholy. And so maybe you yelled at somebody. Maybe you, quote unquote, did a sin because you watched a movie you shouldn't have. Or you sinned because you got your nose pierced during Bible study instead of being at Bible study. Or maybe you sinned because you dated a guy that didn't love Jesus as much as that community thinks that they should love Jesus. Maybe you sinned because let's just be real, you had sex before marriage, or you questioned their thoughts on homosexuality and how God views that and loves those people, or how he shuns those people. Maybe you said a cuss word, or maybe you ate something on fast day and you were fasting to go on your mission trip. Those were quote unquote derived, those human things that make a human, those normal things, those were considered that fueled by demonic spirits. And so therefore we had to have those demons, because apparently we opened a door for demons to come inside of us if we acted in any way that was human. And we then needed those demons to be cast out so that our behavior would match up to their doctrine and their theology. Which, so I came to a place that I began to really question a lot of that doctrine and theology. And I started to have this thought process, this idea in my head that maybe I could love God and challenge the rules of that ministry or the church that I was brought up in that made me feel so small, so unseen, so unheard, so not understood. And that maybe calling the man-made rules of the church into question didn't mean that I loved God any less. Maybe I could love God. It's funny because that religious community, it feeds you the information you're supposed to have, and then it punishes you for questioning that information. And it does it all through belonging. The idea of, you're going to belong to us as long as you eat the information I feed you. However, if you question it, then you are now an outcast and you might have a demon. And so I began to question it, and I began to think, is that really I am so afraid to ask some of the hard questions to God, because that might mean I don't love him or believe in him. But I started having, it did, which was the ultimate excommunication. Which I was not afraid of being separated from God. I was afraid of burning and hurting forever. And so that alone should be a big hint of how sick that system is that the idea that, hey, if you ever question an idea, you might go burn forever. And so I began realizing that maybe I don't agree with how they view how to handle homosexuality in the church. Maybe I don't agree with their concepts on, relationships and Harry Potter and, certain types of or piercings and tattoos and the way that you interact with people. Maybe
I'll never forget my first tattoo when they found out I had a tattoo. I got called into a secret meeting, and I got it on my rib cage because I was feeling bold, but nobody could see it.
I have 6 tattoos now, but sorry.
And you didn't want your parents to see it.
And I didn't want
so
my
you got in
parents
your
to see it.
cage because you didn't want to get in trouble. Yeah.
I didn't want parents or the pastor.
Mind you, we're over 21 at this point. We are grown tattoos and taking out our nose piercings.
Yep. And I sat before a panel of people to discuss my first tattoo. Anyway, sorry, carry on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Or maybe I don't believe it. Maybe I was questioning the church's view on drinking and how God viewed alcohol. And heaven forbid we now step on the church's view of, things like, naturopathic ways of healing ourselves, like possibly through THC and not just CBD and different stuff like that. We won't go down that rabbit trail, but maybe as I grew older and my worldview enlarged, I realized I don't think everything I've been fed in this community fits what I really think God was saying through that scripture.
Yeah.
But even to this day, there is still a slight fear I feel on the inside of me that says, what if you're wrong, Angela? And what if all of this questioning and searching is you sinning and you're going to go to hell? Like, what if you are so disillusioned? And so even now I had that twinge of, oh my God, what if I research something and I get the wrong idea? What if what if I did find some healing through yoga and meditation, and now I've invited a demon into my life and I'm just living this disillusioned life where I'm going to go to hell and I'm going to die. Go ahead.
Which I think is, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's such a real thought. And I feel like more people than not are struggling with that. And especially with women specifically, I have been a part of so many different ministries. I've done so many different mission trips and talked to just women all over the world who have served in leadership and pastoral positions, but yet they've been fed some kind of doctrine that made them fear losing their salvation, or that they were just like one wrong action or word away from burning in hell. And it's shocking the amount of people who think that. And so I think that is such a red flag. If you are a part of
I think as
any ministry that says you're going to burn in hell if XYZ, no, if you have a personal relationship with the Lord, you're good. Work out your salvation.
And I think that the church has been, and let's hope that this changes, but I think the church has been the biggest forerunner in oppressing women and in racism. I think the church has been the loudest voice in oppression of anyone who is not heterosexual. I think they're the biggest oppressors of women. I think they are the biggest oppressors of in racism, and they think that they're not. They like to say that they're not, but one thing I noticed, especially growing up in that type of environment, is that basically to be able to be committed and faithful and loyal to God meant you had to create a lot of distance between you and somebody who was not following his rules. And you had to be very vocal that they were wrong and they could go to hell and that they should follow what you're following. And I know they use all kinds of scriptures like, come out from the world and be separate, but I don't know if the way we're playing that scripture out is what God meant when he said that.
I agree, because if you look at the 4 gospels, Jesus was with all of the worst people all the time.
Well, and he's not scared of our humanity. There is nothing that we do as humans that he's scared of. And I think as the church, we react in a lot of fear. Oh my God, you feel like you might be a homosexual. Okay, that's scary to me. So now we need to definitely let you know how wrong you are, how sick that is, and how much you can't be a part of what we're doing. And hopefully that will get you to completely change your mind and live a different life. But I realized all that kind of stuff does. And I said, I said that, but it could mean anything. all that stuff does is that means that we hide and change behavior to remain accepted.
You become a robot. Yeah.
You just hide behavior, you modify it, you change it, you talk yourself out of whatever it is going on the inside of you so that you will not be dimed out or exposed and then embarrassed and rejected.
And your relationship with the Lord, I've said this so many different ways in other podcasts, your relationship with the Lord is between you and the Lord. Like, yes, biblically, you should have accountability in some form. You should have mentors. You should have healthy people that speak into your life. But those people should never control or dictate what you do. Those people are there as a support system to love you and to show grace and to challenge you when you need it. And, you know, I'll never forget when I left our college ministry, and I want to get to your story of when you left as well. But when I left, I had just ended an engagement with a guy that I never should have been with. It was really unhealthy. And most people did not even like the guy that I was engaged to. But yet, when I ended it, I got in so much trouble. And I never should have ended it that way. I should have done it this way. I should have, I was in trouble as a grown woman. And then I decided to move back to the Dallas area because I couldn't stay. All of the abuse and the most horrible things in my life had happened in that area, and I needed to cut it off. And it is amazing to me, the prophetic words that I got about how wrong I was. I shouldn't move, what was going to happen if I left. I was even told that if I continued doing ministry without being under that umbrella, that I would be raped again, and it would be my fault because
you draw it to you.
Because I would draw the spirit of lust to me. I wasn't free from that, even though I'd been taken through deliverance for it 100 times. I'll never forget those words. And since then, you know, I've forgiven that person. But to be looked at and to be told all of your relationships have been abusive or, you know, really unhealthy because of you and the spirits that you have, and you're leaving our ministry too early. So if you leave and you get raped again or, you know, whatever, that's on you. That's the worst thing. It's like if somebody is pulling out, whether you agree with it or not, you can know in your heart of hearts that person is making the wrong move, but they are the ones who have to answer for that before the Lord. You can be there and say, hey, you know, these are my concerns, you know, hey, just, you know, because I love you, I want to say X, Y, Z, but you cannot control them. You've got to let people go and work out their relationship with God. And just,
and you don't get to, well, first off, why does changing geography locations mean that you're not going to stay in connection with those people? Like that fear that you changing, it's all fear-based. It's all based in fear, and it's all directed in fear. And, and of course, at the very core of it, it's all centered around the currency of belonging and rejection.
Right.
And to them, to believe is to belong. And to not believe is to be rejected, not just by them, but by God himself. And I, my journey began to evolve. I think I went on a mission trip with a very popular church that a lot of people know about. It's a very popular ministry. And for the first time I was, there were people on that mission trip that were part of that church, and they were talking about, I think some sort of alcohol they were going to have when it was over, and they were going to kind of all hang out and maybe open a cold beer. And I was like, oh my God, how are these people ministering to other people on the streets and sharing God's love, and they're going to go and consume alcohol? And I began to think inside of myself, like, how do I put that in this box? Because my box was, we don't smoke, we don't chew, we don't drink, and we don't go out with girls that do. Like, we don't do any of those things. And so how could they still be effective in ministry and do those things? And, I began to think, what if what I was taught wasn't exactly what he meant? Like,
Yeah.
like I'm not saying that those scriptures aren't there, but I am challenging is the way that we're following those scriptures the way he meant for them to be followed? Like, is that
Yeah.
really where he was actually coming from? And what of those scriptures are like for us now? And what of those scriptures are cultural? And some of those are based in a culture that no longer exists, because back then the internet did not exist. Our culture did not exist. And so, and I think maybe God was hoping we'd have the common sense enough to work through that. I think the church for the first time is saying, maybe he meant something a little bit different than how we took that. Or maybe we're walking the scripture out in a way he did not mean for it to be walked out. And so, I definitely began to question that. I became vocal, and I didn't leave the ministry. Actually, I was kicked out of the ministry.
I was going to say, I want to hear you tell that.
Belonging. Yeah. So belonging was still that was my $100 bill. That was my $1 million. That was my currency. That's what I was longed for. And I was so desperate to belong and so afraid of being alone that I stuck out 2 very abusive relationships, just to continue to belong to those people and to have them in my life. And so because the thought of pioneering a path on my own, the thought of doing things on my own felt so scary to me.
Well, and you're taught too that you can't have that independence. Like you're conditioned to rely on the leadership. So to pioneer or forerun anything is like, I could get it all wrong. And I struggle with that to this day. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it wasn't necessarily, it was more just the fear of being alone and being unloved and being unwanted, and community meant so much to me. And so instead of that being reinforced with, Angela, you will always belong to us, in both those abusive relationships, it was all centered around insecurity. I was constantly insecure about my status with them. And if I could do something bad enough that they would just hate me forever. And, so I ended up being more verbal about my views, and especially I think drinking. So drinking in the church, I began to be more verbal that I didn't think that maybe was bad. And maybe that God was more concerned with a whole heck of a lot of other stuff than if, you have a beer or a glass of wine.
Or a lemon drop. That was your drink for a bit. It was a lemon drop.
Yeah. And maybe, or we used to secretly drink Moscatos.
We did,
so we couldn't tell anybody. That's when I first started, because I only liked this.
It was really sweet. So we would draw the shades and watch movies and drink Moscato.
Yeah, we would. And so, sorry, someone just walked in, but so we would do that. And so, they inevitably ended up, kicking me out. I remember a spokesperson for the main leader of that ministry, called or had a meeting with me and was like, hey, you're no longer allowed to be a part of this. You're no longer allowed to be involved in what's going on. So you're going to have to go. You can't walk in the doors, basically. Like, you're no longer allowed to be around anybody. You're toxic. You're a bad person. So now something you've given your life to for the last 15 years because you've questioned it, now you've got to go.
Yep.
And it was the ultimate price to be paid for my questioning, which was disassociation with community.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I no longer belonged.
Yeah.
And every fear that I had came true. And so I had to choose belonging versus my convictions and what my heart told me was true and what was okay. And inevitably, psychologically, I didn't realize at the time, but I was choosing my hearts and my convictions over belonging with that group of people. And they did exactly what they're geared to do. They could not handle the questions. They were so afraid of me and my questions that inevitably they told me I could never come back again. And I have literally never been back again.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And you've had to walk a really, really hard journey. I think much harder than mine with that ministry, because when I moved, I cut everything off really hard. I even cut you off for a little bit because I mentally needed to leave it all behind. I needed to change locations, and I needed the worst chapter of my entire life to stay there. And so I did. And I ended up blocking a lot of people, because when I moved back to Dallas, I had people would blow up my phone, text messages, voicemails, all kinds of stuff. And I blocked people. I cut people off because I couldn't do it. But you stayed in that town for a little while, and then you relocated. And then you ended up having to go back to that town later. So what was your journey once you moved away? Can you share a little bit about, once you were removed from that ministry, kind of what you dealt with between you and the Lord and life, and then coming back to that town?
Yeah. So I moved actually out of a tiny Texas town to the big city of Seattle, which they fly the pride flag at the same height they fly the American flag. So that's about how different the culture.
And we were in the Texas Bible Belt is where we were.
We were in the buckle of the Bible Belt. Like, we were the buckle part of that. And so I definitely changed cultures tremendously. I was left I was very alone. And so I was very alone at that time in my life. And I basically I would walk a lot to keep my sanity. It rains a lot there. And so I felt myself as I was basically grieving the loss of being kicked out of that community, I started really in that grief and being by myself. I started feeling very depressed, anxious, suicidal, all those things. And so I would walk just to get my head on straight. And I began listening to podcasts and audiobooks when I did that. And I stumbled upon a lady by the name of Brene Brown. And she was just in Texas Weekly, called America's official, I think what they call her. They called her America's therapist, I think. So she's basically, she was in Texas Weekly for that. And anyways, so she came out with a book called Braving the Wilderness, The Secret to Belonging, and basically began she was my mentor. She started walking me out of where I was at, with this idea that, okay, now I belong to no one. I have no community. I don't even belong to myself, because I don't know who I am outside of that community. And I had never been taught to think separately, individualistically, and I've never been taught to think on my own and decide on my own what is right and what is good. I have only been taught to digest what they told me what was right and what was good. And so for the first time in my entire life, I was figuring out for myself what was right for me, which meant I had to answer the question, who am I? Who am I? What do I like? What do I believe? What are the things about me that I've been told my whole life are bad that are actually good and assets? And I began that journey. I realized at 30 something, I didn't know who the hell I was. I didn't know what I represented. I didn't know my own personal convictions and my own personal thoughts on things. And I had to, at 30 something years old, begin to re-meet myself, become reacquainted with myself, and actually meet this person who I had never let her talk. I'd never let her make her own choices or her own decisions. That would have been terrible, because she can't be trusted, right? Because inevitably she's wrong and has demons on the inside of her. So to trust her intuition, to trust who she is definitely a quick road to hell. So I couldn't trust her. And I had to basically meet her for the first time and say, hi, who are you? What do you think? What do you like? and begin to trust myself and my intuition, and that the journey I was on was actually a journey that God had wanted to lead me on.
I love the way you just said that. I don't think I've ever heard somebody explain it that way, because for anybody who's listening who either is sitting here going, oh my gosh, I now I'm realizing I'm in a cult, or maybe I've been in a cult like or really religious environment that's not healthy for me, but I don't know what to do. There is, when you remove yourself from that, there's that victory that I think you have to celebrate. Like, you have to give yourself, once you've officially gotten out, you have to be like, yes, I did it. And to do some kind of victory, whatever, for yourself. But then there is this purging process where you are in a serious identity crisis. And I went through that, and I wasn't in the ministry as long as you were. But when I moved back to Dallas, I knew nobody but my family. And I lived by myself in an apartment. I would go to work, and at work I would have meltdowns where I would just go to the bathroom and cry and not know why I was crying. And I'd come home and I would lay on my living room floor and cry. I didn't know what else to do. And it was about a year of deep depression and just trying to figure out how to navigate life without somebody controlling, because I grew up, with all kinds of really controlling people in my life, messed up people in my life. I was in a terrible relationship, of which I continued other bad relationships. And then I had this ministry. And so all I knew was control and trauma. And so it's dark, but it's beautiful. And so I want people to be encouraged that, real life talk, you're going to go through hell when you get out. But at the same time, you will find yourself. And there is beauty that and freedom that's on the other side that's almost indescribable. So I love that you said that. And I know we've got to wrap up here in just a second, but were there any scriptures or like Bible stories or people that came into your life that really helped you navigate through that season, just for those who could use, like, okay, if I go to the Bible and I need some help, what would you say to those people?
I would say the biggest help for me was really leaning into women who had kind of walked down my path before. So I began to just lean into them and their thoughts and all of that. And one of those, I think I leaned a lot into some of the women I listened to, the books I read, Brene Brown, Jen Hatmaker. I know that she wrote a lot of books in the evangelical community. Her daughter actually came out that she said that she was gay. And then, so Jen kind of maybe reassessed her thoughts on those things. And I think that they even pulled her book off of the shelves and off of the, she was definitely excommunicated from the evangelical community altogether. And she walked through that a big time. And I listened to her podcast and read her book. She just came out with a book called, I think it's Fierce and Free. And basically it's the roadmap for women like us who are trying to walk out of the control that we've been put under and told to be small and quiet, because that's what's acceptable. Even though inside of us, we know that we were meant to live very big and very loud, and that our largeness and our loudness is not something that God is sad with, but that he actually created us to be that way. And so she wrote that book. I know Brene Brown wrote the book, like Belonging, the journey, to true belonging, or Braving the Wilderness, the journey to true belonging. That book changed my life. Glennon Doyle, I would encourage you. She just wrote a book called Untamed, and talking about, talking about how we live our life just in this tamed thought process, and that we were called to live our life much bigger and more untamed as women. And so she wrote that book. There's a lot of people out there, but right now there's a big, I think, influx of women who are speaking up and speaking out, who've been on this journey before us, who've done it, that you could actually kind of follow them as a roadmap and follow kind of what they did. And that's what I desperately needed, was a mentor.
Yeah.
I needed a mentor to teach me how to walk out of what I was in. And if you've never been in that kind of community, it's hard to help mentor people. And I didn't have one. So instead of just kind of like being sad about it, I reached out. I just started listening to podcasts and books.
Yeah.
And was able to kind of really walk myself out of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is such a good point, because it is a very lonely journey at times. And, you know, I definitely would pray for God to put people in your path who can be there with you on that journey. But at the same time, like audiobooks and podcasts and all of those things are a wealth of knowledge, and they're incredibly helpful in healing in a lot of ways. And, you know, I would say for me, the book of John, weirdly enough, was so helpful to me, because out of all 4 of the Gospels, the book of John is where you see the most of God's miracles. And you just see, for me, it was like God's love was so much more amplified in the book of John than any of the other Gospels. And so I just read John over and over and over again. And I think I just camped out in that book for months, and still go back to it quite often just to read about, okay, God loves me no matter what. God hung out with, you know, all of the most horrible people that there were, or Jesus did, and he loved them, and he did miracles for them, and he met them where they were at. And so for me, just to see Jesus walking through his life and his ministry with his disciples in that book was so helpful to remind me, okay, yeah, I've sinned, I've messed up, but Jesus really loved these people a lot, so he's gonna love me too. And you know, that might have just been my own special part of the Bible that God spoke to me through. But I would encourage people to dive into the Bible and not separate yourself, because it's so easy when you leave a strict religious community or church to just throw out all of the things. And I think it's so important that you work out all of the questions and the doubts that you have, as controversial as they may seem, as difficult as it may be, like homosexuality or, you know, guns or racism or, you know, sex before marriage. Like, go have the hard conversations with God, because like you were saying, he's just so unafraid of your thoughts and your feelings. And I think to leave a church or religious community and walk away from God too is so detrimental. I think God is so ready for you to leave that. Go ahead.
No, I think that God never meant rules to be a separation between us and him. In fact, that's why Jesus existed, is because the rules that he had created were causing separation between him and us. And he went and corrected that. And he does not mean that to happen now. And so this fear that we are going to stumble upon something, do something, think something, ask something that is going to separate us from him is the most like, it's like a slap in the face of what he came and undid. And to actually play that out now in our own lives, to where we distance ourselves. You cannot talk to someone if they are not of the same sexual orientation or belief as you are. You cannot hang out with somebody, you know, if they believe politically different, or if they, you know, that idea is the same concept as rules and regulations and principles. They are divisive, and he does not set his principles more important than he sets his connections. And his connection to us is more important than his principles and rules being followed. I can guarantee it. And if you're even having this thought of like, oh my God, but what if that means everyone's going to go crazy, and what, you think you can just sin and get away with it? That right there is religion. That there is the very thing that has caused us to our voice, that has caused us to be the most poor representation of who he is. And that right there is what has made our voice a joke to any group of people out there that are lost and they're trying to figure it out. And here we come in and we say, hey, you know what, this principle is more important than connection with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't go hang out with you until you believe or have the same sexual orientation as I do.
That's so good.
It's bullshit. Really,
Yeah.
it is. And I call bullshit on that way of thinking. I call bullshit on us arguing with people politically and theologically on Facebook and social media, and using that platform to be divisive. And we quote unquote say that it's not being divisive, it's telling them, you know, how they should live so that they don't go to hell. That
God spent so much time to put Jesus on this earth to die for our sins and raise from the dead. And I feel like we kind of check the box as beginner Christians, like Christianity 101 of like, yes, I acknowledge he did this, but we missed the whole point. Is God looked down and could see all of the sin and all of the terrible things that were going on. And he still, because his connection overrides the principles, like you were saying, he was still like, I've got to make a way to connect to my people directly. And so that is the whole point of the cross, was to bridge the gap and to love his people directly. And we do miss that. And no, it does not give us permission to just sin and live our lives as we please and then just stand before God and be like, well, thanks for dying. You know, it should compel us to connect with God and then that love connection out of that, not out of fear, not out of not wanting to be punished or excommunicated, but the love connection we have with God is the thing that is going to change the way that we act and behave and what we do and we don't do. You know, in any healthy marriage, there are sacrifices that you make because you love that person and you want to keep that connection. It's the same thing with the Lord. So I think that's so good. Anyway,
well, and if I was going to leave
if
I was going to leave one message with the listeners, I would say at this point, like, God is not afraid of your questions. Mm-hmm. If you are in or a part of any type of community that says, if you don't believe how we believe, you don't get to be a part of us, you might really need to question that community mm-hmm. and being a part of them. God isn't afraid of your questions. He's not afraid of your wonder. He created us to think and to work things out and to wonder and to question. Mm-hmm. The second we make curiosity a sin is the second we look no different than every oppressor in the past. Yeah. Curiosity is not a sin. Wondering and questioning is not a sin. And if you're a part of a community that bases your belonging with them based on your behavior and how you have to believe and think to belong with them, it may not be the community that you should be a part of. Yep. And I have learned that healthy relationships and healthy community, they actually encourage curiosity, they encourage questions, they encourage you being the best and the most potential you can be, no matter how different that looks from them. Mm-hmm. And they encourage you being a free thinker and be ruler of your own life, and you working your thoughts and theology out with God and you, and coming to the conclusions that you feel like God has given you, versus having to believe only they believe to be effective or to belong with them. I think that concept's very scary for the church mm-hmm. to step into. Mm-hmm. And it's scary for people to step into, but I think that is more freedom and that looks more like Jesus than the other boxes we've put ourselves in.
I think that's a perfect way to sum up this whole conversation. I agree completely. So I love that you came on and said all of this today, because I know that there are plenty of people who are struggling with very similar things or the same kind of thing. So if you liked today's episode, please subscribe, share it with somebody you think needs it. Leave a comment. You can find me on social media, lizameynig.com. You can send email, find me and send me a DM. So I love hearing from you. I love hearing people's questions and comments. I want this to be a community where people get to have the hard conversations and ask the controversial questions. I want that because we're in this together, and our goal is to get away from the religion and to deepen our relationship with the Lord. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the next episode.